It is my absolute pleasure to welcome onto the stage Linda Calhoun, Sasha Williams, Jeannette Pai-Espinosa, Surina Khan, and Lara Kaufmann. Please join me on stage.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm Linda Calhoun, founder and executive producer of Career Girls. And now I have the pleasure of kicking off our exciting day with our panelists and my co-moderator, Sasha Williams. Sasha is a 15-year-old coder and a student at Carondelet High School, an all-girls high school in Concord. And at 14, she was the youngest Career Girls role model interviewed for our site, in addition to being an actor, a singer, a dancer, a coder. She really does it all. And she's participated in coding workshops presented by Black Girls Code and also the Global Fund for Women, where her team of coders were finalists in an international hackathon to develop apps to keep girls safe. Please join me in welcoming Sasha Williams.
Hi everyone, so of course my name is Sasha Williams. And I'm so glad to be here today to introduce three amazing, wonderful women who inspire young girls and other women so much. First we have is Surina Khan. Surina Khan is the CEO of the Women's Foundation of California. For more than 2 decades, Serena has been a leader in the philanthropic and nonprofit social justice sector. Starting with local community-based publishing in New England and then shifting to the national and global work on an array of social justice issues, including women's rights, LGBT rights, and human rights, and more. Before being appointed the CEO in 2014, Serena served as Director in Democracy Rights and Justice Rights at Ford Foundation. She shaped more than $30 million in annual grant making around the world to expand rights for women, LGBT people, people living with HIV and AIDS, and in the area of strengthening democratic participation and governance. Please welcome Surina Khan. Next we have is Lara Kaufmann. Lara S. Kaufmann is the director of the Public Policy for Girls, Inc. She leads the organization's work to advance the rights and opportunities for all girls. Prior to joining Girls, Inc., Ms. Kaufmann was senior counsel and director for education policies for at-risk students at the National Women's Law Center, where she engaged in litigation, advocacy, and outreach to improve educational outcomes for at-risk girls and young women. Lara co-authored the NWLC's 2014 report with the NAACP LDF, entitled Unlocking Opportunity for African American Girls, a call to action for education equity. Its 2012 report, entitled A Pregnancy Test for Schools, the Impact of Education Laws on Pregnant and Parenting Students. And its 2009 report, with the MALDEF, entitled Listening to Latinas, A Barrier to High School Graduation. Ms. Kaufmann also worked as staff attorney with the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau on the Consumer Protection, an assistant United States attorney in Chicago, an associate at the law firm of McDermott, Will, and Ermey, and a law clerk to then Chief Judge Marvin Aspen of the U.S. District Court in Northern District of Illinois. Please welcome Lara Kaufmann. Finally, but definitely not least, we have Jeannette Pai-Espinosa. Jeannette Pai-Espinosa is the president of the National Crittenton Foundation. She is a firm believer in the power and potential of young girls and women. Jeannette assumed leadership in the National Crittenton Foundation, the TNCF, in January of 2007. She brings to this 132-year-old institution 40 years of experience in advocacy, education, public policy, strategic communication, program development, and direct service delivery. She began her career as a vocal advocate and activist for issues of importance to girls and women in the mid-70s. Working to open doors and address gender bias, today she leads the TNCF, which is a national umbrella for 27 members of the Crittenton family and agencies. These provide services in 31 states and the District of Columbia. Crittenton agencies provide the comprehensive mix of gender and cultural responsive, trauma-informed and specific, developmentally appropriate, strength-based services to girls and young women who are survivors of multiple forms of childhood experiences and violence. Jeannette is currently the chair of the National Foster Care Coalition, the co-director of the National Girls Initiative, Office of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, U.S. Department of Justice. Additionally, she's a member of the Advisory Committee of Human Rights and Project for Girls, Advisory Committee for the Women's Service, the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. She's also part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Advocacy Committee to the Family Story and the Advocacy Board of the Hope and Grace Fund. Please welcome Jeannette Pai-Espinosa. So, my first question for you wonderful three ladies up here is, what is your scope on the problems and issues facing the young girls, and what is your facts and figures about it?
Well, I'm happy to start. Thank you, first of all, for that wonderful introduction, and to Alliance for Girls to bringing us all together. I'm really delighted to be here. Again, I'm Surina Khan. I'm the CEO of the Women's Foundation of California. We are a statewide community foundation here in California supporting women and girls in a variety of ways. We essentially work to advance the health, safety, and economic security of women and girls in California. And California is an interesting place. Those of you from around the country, welcome. It's an amazing, amazing state. It's a global economy. We have, the center of innovation. So many of the things that we all use, like our iPhones and our Ubers, if we took one to get here, we're all developed here in California, and yet we have so many intractable problems. We have the highest poverty rate in the nation. And that means that about 3.5 million women and girls are living in poverty. So one of the biggest problems that we have is the number of girls who are living in poverty in California and around the country. Yes. And just to provide some context, I've lived in California since 2000. I grew up in Connecticut. And almost 3.5 million women and girls who are living in poverty in California make up the entire population of women in Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Vermont combined. Mm. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of figuring out how to deal with the number of women that we have and girls living in poverty. So right now, the issue of young women in California and around the country living in poverty is one of the most intractable problems that we have. The other problem is that we have girls who are not graduating from high school, and it's even worse for girls of color. So about 15% of girls are not graduating from high school, and this affects, our lifelong pursuits in terms of being able to support ourselves, being able to get out of poverty, to have economic security, to build assets and wealth over our lifetime, to be able to retire, save money. So graduating from high school is a key factor in girls' future economic well-being. In California, we have a problem around public education because it's unequal across the state. And so some schools get a lot of resources and others don't. And that's a problem that needs to be addressed. And the way that these problems need to be addressed for us is in two ways, is providing resources, grants to women and girls organizations through working with donors and other foundations. And also it's about making sure that girls are at the table and preparing young women and girls to really solve these problems. We have one underlying value, which is that those of us who are closest to the problems in the communities, we're figuring out how to get through the day. We know how to solve our own problems. And so we need to make sure that we are represented, that we have the skills to be able to solve those problems and to be at the table. Because what we have across the board is what I call the 17 to 25% problem, which means that, in any field that you look at, whether it's representation in government, representation in media, healthcare, philanthropy, the nonprofit sector, women are not in leadership. And so the girls who are growing up in this generation need to be equipped to lead so that we can change some of these intractable problems.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Sasha, for your important question. I'm going to drill down on a couple of other issues that Serena didn't mention, specifically school pushout and the problem of overly punitive disciplinary practices. This affects girls of color and African American girls in particular. And you should all read Dr. Monique Morris's book, Pushout, that was recently released. But 12% of African American girls are suspended from school between pre-K and 12th grade. That's 6 times the rate of white girls. It's higher than the rate for any other group of girls and higher than for white boys, Latino boys, or Asian American boys. And 19% of African American girls with disabilities are suspended as compared to 6% of white girls with disabilities. And in some places it's worse than others. In some places you have as many as 20 to 25% of black girls being kicked out of school, suspended or expelled. Black girls represent 17% of female students, but 31% of girls who are referred to law enforcement, or 43% of girls who have a school-related arrest. But of course, African American girls are not engaged in more frequent misbehavior or more serious behavior than their white counterparts. They're just being punished, often for very minor offenses, in a more harsh manner. And a lot of times the offenses we're talking about are based on deeply entrenched racial and gender stereotypes and the intersection of those that affect the way that teachers and school leaders react to the behavior of African American girls. So a lot of times we're talking about dress code violations, hairstyles, speaking assertively, fighting back when provoked. These are things that African American girls are punished for that other girls are not punished for, or not as harshly. And there's a serious failure on the part of our schools to look at the underlying issues that lead girls to act out in certain ways when there are offenses that are actually, serious. The other thing is that girls' share of juvenile justice delinquency cases is rising, and African American girls are now 33% of girls in the juvenile, 33% of juvenile justice involved youth. They're often arrested for either violations of technical probation or for status offenses, which wouldn't be illegal if they were over 18 years old. And a lot of girls who get involved in the juvenile justice system have experienced physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, and yet instead of getting the services they need, they end up confined and often re-victimized through that process. in terms, I mean, we could go on, and I don't want to take too much time, but girls of color have higher rates of sexual harassment, sexual violence, commercial sexual exploitation. 42% of women who've been raped were first forced to have intercourse before the age of 18, and that includes 12% before the age of 11. And girls of color are more likely to be forced to have intercourse, to be touched or pinched or grabbed in a sexual way. LGBT and gender nonconforming girls face this at even higher rates, particularly LGBT and gender nonconforming girls of color. So again, we have to look at the intersections of these categories and realize that the barriers are layered. Academically, as a result of these and other factors, we're leaving our girls behind. As Serena mentioned, graduation rates for girls of color are particularly low. Girls of color are more likely to be held back a grade. They're less likely to do well on standardized tests. They have lower GPAs. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of girls of color are concentrated in schools that don't have adequate resources, where teachers are not experienced, where they don't have access to the full range of math and science courses. And even though girls now women outnumber men graduating from post-secondary schools, we have only 18% of women, 18% of computer science and engineering graduates are women. And of course, the STEM fields are those that lead to, in today's economy, a lot of the highest paying, most in high demand jobs. So we need to do better. Obviously, this affects economic outcomes for women and families. And there are other health and wellness indicators as well. Reproductive health is an issue we could go into. We could go into the fact that the majority of girls under the age of 9 are not satisfied with their bodies. We could go into the fact that 80% of girls in high school do not get the recommended level of physical activity per day. And this is unique to girls. Many more boys are getting the recommended level of physical activity or are engaged in sports than girls. So there's a lot of work to do. But I don't mean to be, a total downer. There are one of the studies I've looked at shows that girls of color and African American girls in particular aspire to be leaders in great numbers, and so we need to capture that momentum and encourage them. We'll get into that soon.
What they said. I guess the challenge the challenge of going last is that many of the facts have already been given and sort of the context has already been set. So I'm going to take just a little bit of a different tact to kind of sum it up, because I think my comments relate both to what Serena and Lara said. And that is, so given all these challenges that girls face, what is our responsibility as partners and as we work with them?
Not to continue on the problems and the bad news, which is what we decided to start with, but what's working is the organizations like Youth Justice Coalition, the Center for Young Women's Freedom, previously Center for Young Women's Development, Khmer Girls in Action, Act for Women and Girls. These are all grant partners of the Women's Foundation of California, and I'm really proud to say that for each one of those organizations, I think it's true for the Center for Young Women's Freedom, but back then when it was the Center for Young Women's Development, we provided the very first grant, $5,000 to get them started. We took the risk when nobody else would. Thank you. It really makes me so happy. Same thing for Act for Women and Girls, doing amazing work in the Central Valley. Homegirl Cafe in LA. So for us who are in philanthropy, we have to make sure that the organizations that are doing this work have the resources. And then there's a larger problem, which is that in philanthropy, we got started in '79 as the Women's Foundation. The women's funding movement started in the '70s, because back then only 1% of philanthropic dollars were going specifically to women and girls issues. Now, in 2005, when I first came to the Women's Foundation of California, that number was hovering around 7%. So we moved the needle a little bit, but not enough. And now it's at 9%. So at least it's gone up a little bit more. We're making a little bit of progress. But we need to make sure that the organizations that are doing this work are resourced. And one other thing that I will say, two other things about how things are working is that one of the ways in which we do our grant making is through giving circles. And we have a giving circle of girl philanthropists called Violet's Giving Circle. They're at the Marlborough School in LA. Not all of them are from wealth. It's an elite private school. But not all of the girls who are in the Giving Circle are from wealth. Some of them are from low-income neighborhoods like Boyle Heights. And it's very powerful to see girls, young women, making the decisions, raising the money, and then making the decisions about where the dollars go. So they're supporting Homegirl Cafe, they're supporting Right Girl, and a number of other organizations that are doing amazing work. And previously, we also used to have something called the Sisterhood Fund, where we would train low-income girls, girls of color from communities around California on how to make grants, what to look for, how to read financial statements, so that we can really take that power and put it in our own hands. And then the final example I will give is that we have at the Women's Foundation of California a Women's Policy Institute, which is an experiential year-long program that trains women from young to older women about how public policy is made. And this year we have a group of young women who make up a reproductive justice team. And they're working on a bill. They have to come up with a real-time policy project, move it through the legislature. In the 13 years of running the Institute, 25 of these policy projects have been written into law. And one of the ones that I think is going to get to the governor's desk is being worked on by young women who are working on a bill that supports teen parents and makes it possible for them to stay in school. And what they're proposing is that schools should give time off to parenting teens, young women and men, so that they, just like we have now in San Francisco and other parts of the country where we have paid time off to bond with our children, our babies, that young parents should be supported to do the same thing and get time off from school, because that will keep them in school. We have a big problem around dropout rates, teen pregnancy, and that leads to dropouts. But this is a way to keep them in school, and which again leads to better economic outcomes. So there's a lot that's working well, and we can all do something to help support that work.
Those are great stories, and it's encouraging to hear about a state like California that's able to make so much progress. Sadly, some of what Serena was describing is actually already required under federal law, under Title IX, but schools are not complying, and nor does it go far enough in terms of really accommodating the needs of student parents. And so I wish we could say at the federal level that we got 25 of anything passed, but there does seem to be some bipartisan consensus in Congress around reform of the juvenile justice system, and unfortunately there's one senator from Arkansas, Senator Cotton, who's currently holding up the whole thing. But there are going to be, if the reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act moves forward, there are some important provisions in there that would improve the situation for girls, including closing the loophole or the exception that allows states to arrest girls for status offenses like running away and truancy, because that's obviously a huge problem. So we're working on getting that passed in Washington. I think some of the things that are working at the state and local level, and even at the federal level, is grassroots activism. And I think an important model for us to look at is the Dignity in Schools campaign around school discipline, there's a coalition of national, state, and local groups and parents and students themselves who've been working in a really concentrated way for several years now to get school discipline reform happening, and they've got it on the agenda of Congress, and they were able to get some interesting pieces into the recent reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. They have been able to get schools to adopt restorative justice practices or positive behavioral interventions and supports, which are alternatives to the punitive disciplinary system that most schools currently have. A lot of schools in recent years adopted zero tolerance policies that land kids suspended or expelled for doing one thing, or just for no good reason at all. And there are alternatives, and there are evidence-based practices that are working not only to improve school climate, to make they're improving student academic outcomes, they're improving teacher morale, they're lowering the rates of bullying and harassment in those schools and the incidence of violence in those schools. Restorative justice practices in particular have been shown to have, to make a dent in the racial disproportionality of school discipline rates. And those practices are really focused on remedying the harm that's done by a particular thing rather than focusing on punishing the offender, but actually looking at the big picture and getting people to communicate. It's not going to be appropriate in every single instance, but it's an important direction for us to move in. At Girls Inc., one of the things that we are focusing more on now, and as part of our next 5-year strategic plan, is getting girls themselves involved in advocacy. And this is something that I came on board to lead, and what we are in the process of doing is reaching out to our entire network, the girls we serve, their families, the affiliates who run our programming, and others, to get a sense of what they think the most pressing issues are facing girls and what they would like us to push for, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level. We're also going to be listening to girls in listening sessions around the country and talking to them about what they're most concerned about, what they think we can add, what they want to do, and we want to get them involved directly. So I'm going to be developing a girls activist network and developing hopefully a lot of momentum from our grassroots. We're currently serving about 140,000 girls around the US and Canada with our programming. Not all of them are getting our comprehensive programming, and we're trying to grow that number because we think serving the whole girl is leading to the best outcomes. We're targeting underserved girls. Girls Inc., 70% of the girls we serve identify as girls of color. 68% come from families with incomes of less than $30,000 a year, and 10% come from families with incomes of less than $10,000 a year. And we're trying to provide them with what we call the Girls Inc. experience, which is a combination of trusting mentoring relationships with trained staff and volunteers, a safe girls-only space where they can feel supported mentally and physically and safe, and the programming, the media literacy, the financial literacy, the informal exposure to STEM education, leadership training, all of the things that we know are important for girls in order for them to grow up healthy, educated, and independent. And a piece of that, of course, is empowering them to be agents of change in their communities and to know that their voices matter, that they are the experts of their own experiences. And so my work will be focused going forward on trying to build momentum among our network in partnership with other organizations. So that's some of what we think is working.
That's great. That's really great.
So just a couple things to add, I think, from a transformative perspective and actually seeing what's been changing over the last few years. I think the thing that's working the most is that we're taking the time to listen to girls. Ask them what their experience is, what helps, what doesn't help, what they need. I think they really know, given the freedom and the safety to answer that. So I think listening to girls is number one. I think then taking another step, which is working with those girls within that context who want to be leaders, who want to be up front and center, who are really kind of activists at heart, and will put it all out there, to stop other girls from having to experience what they did. I think that that's working. And this is both in policy, but also in program design, service delivery, I think kind of across the board. I think, I know Lara talked about it, but I think alliances like this are working. I mean, I think the power of an alliance that includes girls is pretty unstoppable in any local community. You then create an environment in which some people just can't say no anymore because of the alliances that are built. The National Girls Initiative, I want to recognize Karen Francis out there, who's the other co-director of the National Girls Institute. So we have, OJJDP has made a commitment to support the work of alliances. We are funding through our Innovation Awards, the alliance here. We funded an alliance in Connecticut, in Iowa, I had to write it down, Connecticut, Iowa, Central California, soon to come DC, Oregon, and Iowa. And so we think those are really powerful transfer. I'm getting there. We are also funding, thank you very much, the development of programs and services that are innovative with a specific focus on girls of color, indigenous girls, immigrant girls. Hawaii, Central California, and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Southwest Key in Texas. So we think that those are things, and a requirement of that is that you engage girls in the work. I think that's, and then again, even beyond that, so alliances are great, but if we can connect alliances to each other around the country, imagine that. That's it.
Okay, so another question that I have for this wonderful panel is, like, what can we do? Like, all of us out here in the audience, what can we do to, like, have our first steps to really get involved and really help young girls and understand these problems and these issues?
I think you said it right in the question, which is we have to get involved. And we can do that in a number of different ways. We can give our money, we can give our time, we can give our expertise, and I think we need to do all of that. I think we need to be coordinated and collaborating with each other, which is why what's happening here is amazing. That there is an alliance for girls is an amazing step. So, you know, just getting us all together so that we can talk, understand the problems, but understand what we're each doing collectively so that our work can complement each other. So I just give it up to Alliance for Girls, and also we're the proud fiscal sponsor of Alliance for Girls here in the Bay Area, and we're thrilled to be able to support this work in that way. And then there's two other things I will say. One is that this issue of being represented. So we've got to start young so that when we get older, we can fix some of the problems that we're seeing now. So whether that's training and policy advocacy, whether it's training in media, in government, in healthcare, you name it, we need leadership of girls, young women, and women as we get older. And that training needs to start early. So one thing that I will offer is that we recently, in partnership with the California Budget and Policy Center, created a Women's Wellbeing Index for all 58 of California's counties, so that we can see, it affirms a lot that we already know, that there are a lot of problems. We can see what the data is, how counties are ranking on 30 different indicators that are organized around health, safety, employment and earnings, economic security, and political empowerment. And in the area of political empowerment, if you go and look, it's a data visualization tool, so you can look at it on on your computer, on your screen. And if you look at the one indicator around political representation and women in the state legislature of California, huge parts of the state are red, and that's not a good color in terms of the index. And so more than 30 counties in California, I think it might be as high as like 38, have zero representation of women. And so if we want to change these problems, we have to be represented in the halls of power, in the Capitol, and again, in any other industry, in media, in the nonprofit sector, even in philanthropy, we don't have leadership of women, and even the numbers are worse when we talk about women of color or women who come from low-income backgrounds. And so we have to get together and work in multiple ways to change all of that.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things on my list was run for office, vote.
Yes.
Please vote. We need to be loud and proud. We need to speak up and call out injustice when we see it. And social media is an incredibly powerful tool, and we need to use it to our advantage. Another thing we can use it for is pushing for reforms at the federal, state, and local level. So you can push your school to adopt more fair disciplinary practices. You can encourage your member of Congress to support passage of this juvenile justice reform bill. You can encourage everybody you know to uncover their own implicit biases. We all have them. And we all need to start talking, like Jeannette said, about racism, sexism, homophobia, in classism, in a really transparent way. We need to examine our own biases, and adults who interact with youth, in schools in particular, really need some training on what it means to have unconscious biases and how to address it. And the other thing is mentor a girl. You know, reach out, and there are lots of opportunities out there to mentor young women and girls and empower them to believe in themselves, and that can make a huge difference. So that's all for me.
So a couple thoughts, and if you've heard me speak before, you've probably heard me say these things before, because just going to say them till everybody listens. So I think the first thing is to remember what's important. I'll use myself as an example. So I'm on this 10-day horrible travel schedule, and my luggage has been lost twice in 4 days. It did not get to here, and so somewhere last night between midnight and 1 a.m. in some time zone between Atlanta and Chicago, as I was really kind of stressed out about what I was going to wear and the shoes and all this stuff, I just had to give myself a little lecture and remind myself it really only matters that I get here. Whether my luggage gets here or not is irrelevant. That's why I have flip-flops on. But, you know, we all get caught up in that, and that's not what the work is. That's the trappings of, that's what we do to ourselves. And so how do we kind of pull back from that and be more clear-sighted about it? And I think the other thing is that it's interesting, you know, as there's more focus being paid on girls, more resources, you see more in the media about it. A community that was very galvanized together because no one cared about us suddenly can become fractured and competitive because now there's money in the game. There's, you know, they got this and I didn't get that, and so in a strange way we become gatekeepers. And we become the barrier to the conversations and the relationships that have to happen. And I'm not saying it's easy, because I don't think it is, but I think to the extent that we can be aware of that, I mean, if we're true, that if we really believe that somewhere at some point in our existence there can be a true sisterhood, maybe it's now. But I think it can be only now if we try to bridge those things and not say, well, she's white, why is she talking about black girl issues? I mean, you know, that stuff happens. And so how do we understand that the collective is always going to be more powerful than the individual and not feel like someone else's success is my loss? You know, we grow together. So not easy. It's not easy. We have to be honest. It's not that easy. And the other thing is, and I know Emma loves this, to out the elephants. Don't leave a meeting with an elephant in the room, because then you're part of the problem. So find a way to say it. Is it a joke? Is it confronting it? Some way, bring it up. I think that's really important. And then really to the way we do our work, to break the silos, to break the barriers, to cross over, to reach across, whatever language you want to use, because these problems didn't come overnight and they weren't created by one system or one individual or one organization. So a lot of it is our own work. And I think if we can remember that we ought to do the work remembering that our daughters and our granddaughters are watching, maybe we hold ourselves to a higher standard than we would just for ourselves.
Yeah.
So one of the questions provided to us by the Twitter hashtag, we have many people are uncomfortable when saying the word feminist. Why is that, and why do you believe that we should change that name? Do you believe that we should change the name of feminist, or do you believe that there's a certain reason why people are uncomfortable for saying that word?
Oh, goodness. I'll just go quickly and say that I don't think we should change the name. There's no need to apologize for feminism. I think a lot of people we were all raised in this society, right? We were all raised in this society that devalues women's contributions and that oppresses women. And so we're carrying around these layers that we may not understand. Again, this is our unconscious bias. I mean, I think that and I'm not trying to be political here, but I think, Hillary Clinton is held to a much higher standard than any other candidate for office, even by women, because they just don't even understand the extent to which the lens through which she is criticized or analyzed is so gendered. And so I think that people are uncomfortable with that because they're just not comfortable with women's power and equality, and we need to confront it and not shy away from it by changing the name. That's my thought.
Right, they're not used to it.
Yeah, I say embrace it. I think I'm with you. We don't need to change the name, but I guess more importantly is what does it mean to each of us? So let's just talk about the specifics of what does feminism mean, and if it means, to you like it does to me, that it's really the, social, political, economic, racial equity, that we all walk in this world together, then let's believe in that and promote that and put a vision forward that is really about gender equity and advancement, because we have a lot to offer. So I say we should embrace it and also really break it down in terms of what does it mean to be about gender equity in terms of the spectrum, how inclusive are we in terms of LGBT communities. I was raised by a mother who didn't, I was born in Pakistan, did not consider herself a feminist. She was a strong woman. My parents were partners. She embodied feminism to me, but I didn't back then. Nobody talked to me about it. And so it's just an interesting dichotomy. So I think it really comes from our experiences, and I do think that we should embrace the history of feminism.
I agree. Just one quick comment is I think the power to self-define is really important. So my question is really, can we redefine it in a way that works today for where we're going? Because it is an exclusive term. I mean, it was predominantly white middle-class women when it began.
Right.
So can we transform it and take ownership of it? I think that's a question we have to address.
How can we engage families especially as we look at what goes on with the criminalization of girls within the school system?
Well, I think that 5 minutes. I think the family is where it all begins. So I think it's crucial. I think our programs and services so often focus on early intervention or intervention that we're not providing enough holistic family support very, very early on. There's a great, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's called VROOM, V-R-O-O-M. It's a great, it's a brain builder, it's an app, it's on the website. It costs nothing, and it's techniques for parents that don't cost any money, using household items to help support the brain development of their children regardless of income. It's in 3 languages. So I think those kinds of tools will really help, because I think it save a lot of heartache and the kinds of issues we've been talking about if we provide some more early support, including for young parents, non-traditional families, whatever that means today. This table has got to ask a question, or I'm going to feel so bad.
Okay. Stand and ask your question.
I want to speak about the elephant in the room. And the United States is one of the 6 countries, together with Iran, Sudan, and you all know about that has not ratified for so many years, refuses to ratify the most important basic convention on women. In addition to that, we're the only country in the world that did not ratify the Child Convention. Even China ratified it. How we can speak about policy and comprehensive reform and legislation and concept about women, and how we can speak about girls if we don't ratify these conventions? Can we be successful by sporadically adding to our legislation and policy as opposed to having the policy and concept? What would you support a national effort or California effort to become a leader and request and achieve the ratification of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is shameful. It is really shameful that the U.S.
Advocacy to pass CEDAW, to have the United States sign.
That the United States is one of, very few countries that has not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the rights of children. And so that is shameful. It really is. And so yes, we need a national effort, and often starts at the local level. So I'm happy to say that San Francisco has signed on to CEDAW, Los Angeles. So it needs to these kinds of efforts need to start at the local level, and it gets back to this issue of representation. Who's voting on those laws?
Yeah, that's right. Right. It should be a no-brainer.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now we have our last question, and it is, what should the next president do to recognize and support the efforts that you were talking about?
We just said that.
Yes, she could ratify the convention on CEDAW. There's plenty of things to do, and maybe one of the things that we can do collectively in preparation for the next president is help her out and give her a list of things. And, certainly get out and vote, but also when she becomes elected, that we help her out and give her a list of things that need to be done. It's like, this has been done in other successful movements. The LGBT movement did it when President Obama got elected, that here's, 10 things that we as a large movement have agreed on are the top priorities. So let's do these 10 things, then we're going to move on to the next 10 things, and we're going to move on to the next 10 things, and we're going to identify them in a way that is inclusive, that has girls at the center, that has women and girls of color at the center, people from low-income communities, to say, here's what we need you to work on.
And another thing that the Obama administration has done so successfully is really elevated our national attention to issues of sexual assault on college campuses. What really needs to happen now is there needs to be a focus on sexual violence problems at the K-12 level, because girls there have even less of a voice and are less supported, but are still enduring this kind of treatment. And so what we can do is, put that on her agenda. I mean, there's a lot that the administration can do just with the bully pulpit that it has, but we also need to focus on Congress, not just the presidency, because there's a limit to what the executive branch can do without Congress. So yeah, there's plenty to do. We have a long list.
Well, that will be the last word, Lara. Let's have a round of applause for these amazing.